In this politically charged climate in which we live, conversations about race and civil rights can get pretty heated pretty quickly. Enter For the Movement. It's a new weekly podcast by the National Urban League, and it's designed to broaden the discussion about civil rights issues.
For the Movement launches on Monday. It is co-hosted by 4 members of the National Urban League, including President and CEO Marc Morial. Here's a preview.
We've been unwavering in our opposition to administration policies that erode civil rights and opportunities for underserved communities. However, we have remained optimistic that we could find common ground in the area of infrastructure development. In his State of the Union address, President Trump sounded a hopeful but vague note on rebuilding the nation's crumbling infrastructure. Now, we are concerned that the administration's planned investment of federal funds does not come close to what is necessary, and details are far and few between.
Marc Morial is the man in that clip. He is the president and CEO of the National Urban League, and he's here now. What's up?
Hey, good to see you guys.
Good to see you. So this is really interesting. There are a lot of podcasts out there now, but why did you choose to start this one?
I think we felt that the podcast was a great way to expand the conversation we're always having. We're having it with people in person, we're having it with people in the media, and the podcast has become, I think, a device of the 21st century for people who really want to dig a little bit deeper. What you can do with a podcast is go beyond a 5 to 10 minute conversation and really give voice to the issues and also provide fabric and perspective. So we're excited, and for us it's the use of technology to expand our message is why we're doing podcasts. We're doing much more work in the digital space, and just like you guys with the streaming network, you've got to play in the 21st century. You've got to use the best avenues available, and technology provides that.
I can't help but to think that our president is part of the motivation here. He has a tendency to tweet sort of one-off lines that do not tell the whole story. I think the most recent thing that we've been talking about is African-American unemployment, right? That's part of the story. I see a tweet from your organization's website talking about African-American wealth, that African-American unemployment may be down, but African-American wealth is also down. Is that the sort of stuff you want to sort of pull apart?
You're right, Anne-Marie, and in the age of Trump, there's a great deal of energy in the resistance. There's a great deal of energy from people who want to be part of the conversation in many ways. And what we can do with a podcast, I mean, we'll have Congresswoman Karen Bass and Kristen Clark of the Lawyers Committee and Malcolm Glenn of Uber in our first podcast, which takes place on Monday. But what it will give us a chance to do is to give voice to people from all over the country, people who are on the front lines in this effort. As you talk about black unemployment, I think what's interesting is that after the president touted this very low unemployment, it spiked back up to 7.7%. Here's the important thing. Yes, am I happy when the unemployment rate comes down? Absolutely. When the black unemployment rate comes down? Absolutely. But it's still twice as high as it is for whites. We still face for not only African Americans and Latinos, but also for many white Americans, this prospect of wages that are not increasing fast enough and have not kept pace with inflation. So that paycheck doesn't go as far as it used to go. We've got to create historical perspective. We've got to also point to the public policy issues and the things people can do, the things that public policy makers can do, the things that communities can do to address these longstanding issues.
You know, Marc, one of the things that we just said as we were introducing this is that when we have discussions around race, they can get heated very quickly. One of the things I love about being a journalist is I get to talk to people who have very different points of views from another person that I may talk to. We all remember back in the 60s, the late great Alex Haley interviewed a member who was a guy who was a white supremacist for a magazine article. The idea of going into the lion's den because he wanted to get the story, he wanted to understand, and he wanted America to understand who this individual was. Would you be willing to have people who have those divergent points of view on the show like this?
I think we'd be willing to have people with divergent points of view as long as they bring what I call an intelligent conversation, and not an accusatory conversation, and also not just a recitation of stereotypes. It's important to recognize that people have different points of view, and we want to absolutely create a place where different points of view can be expressed around the issue of race, but we also want to make sure that the conversation is at a level of intelligence, a level of, if you will, candor, and a level of civility. What we need in America today is an opportunity for all of us to say what we believe and express our views with passion, but what we also need is a climate of civility. So it can be done, yes, with respect, and yes, with fealty to differences of opinion, but in a fashion that's not accusatory or based on what I call stereotypes.
Why do you think it's still so difficult to have an honest conversation about race?
I think, honestly, my point of view is that we're not, as children through American history and the way we're socialized, really taught about this nation's racial history and how you can be proud of America yet still recognize that the Founding Fathers made deep mistakes. You can love this nation but still recognize that slavery and segregation were an indelible negative mark on this country's history. What it forces people to embrace is you've got to recognize that perhaps what we've learned and sometimes what we've taught doesn't go far enough. We do not dig deep enough into the history of race in this country, nor do we dig deep enough into the contributions that African Americans, Latinos, or all people make to what America is today. And I think that's why it's difficult. I think there's also tension around the power dynamic of changing demographics in America. I embrace this view that the diversity of the 21st century will be the engine that will continue to keep this nation strong and resilient. There may be others who believe that diversity is a negative. That's a really clash of visions that we have in this country, and it's not easily, if you will, reconciled. I am confident, though, that the people who believe that America's racial, its ethnic, its religious, its diversity with respect to orientation and gender is its fundamental strength. And that people who embrace that outnumber those who may be fearful. But those who may be fearful, they'll win some battles and they'll have their day. But this is a clash of visions, and that's what we got to do in this country, is recognize that saying that America is great requires us to say that we want America to be great for everyone, and that a great America requires a great Black America. It requires a great Latino America. It requires a great America of people who are white also. It requires greatness from all communities in this country. That's how you make the country great. And to say that we want to make this country great in the 21st century requires, I think, a fundamental understanding of the good, the bad, and the ugly of American history.
I was going to ask you just one more question about this president. He's in the past sort of peddled stereotypes about Hispanics, African Americans, and people get sort of angry and up in arms. But do you think, in a way, because of the things that he puts out there, he's forcing this conversation? He's forcing the rest of us to
what he's doing, he's triggered a response, a passionate response to many of his statements, to many of his policies. And I was asked recently, did I think that the president's views could be redeemed? Yes, if he were willing to be educated, if he were willing to get beyond stereotypes. You can't understand America by simply, with all respect, watching television or following the media. That's important. You've got to get out. You've got to get around. You've got to see people's great sufferings, their passions, their aspirations. And I believe that if the president were to do that, were to sincerely do that, he could learn and understand why and how many of his statements and sometimes his views are hurtful and, if you will, reprehensible.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the guests that you're going to have on the podcast, but I just want to ask you, you talked about the difficulty in having a discussion around race in this country. In my discussions with folks who support President Trump, one of the things that they always say to me, and I'm generalizing because I haven't talked to thousands of people, but I've talked to, several folks throughout the campaign, and what they say is, they actually pinpoint Barack Obama as the reason why we have this growing racial division in this country. They say, before Barack Obama, things were great. Now, I'm mostly talking about, white Americans who have said this. But what is it about that statement that is either troubling or concerning
I think it's
to you?
troubling because they're reacting to the fact that Barack Obama was an African American. I think, Barack Obama was in many respects a cool, mild-mannered, measured leader, and a cool, calm, and measured person who I do not think in his statements was antagonizing or divisive. But if you believe the symbol of an African American president is inconsistent with your view of the leadership of this country, then you might react in that fashion. Now, I distinguish that from people having a policy difference with the views of Barack Obama, which, I'm going to concede is perfectly legitimate. But to say that somehow Barack Obama divided America is just it's a hollow, and if you will, very, very, if you will, hollow accusation that just doesn't bear water. I think it's important in these times to continue to recognize that all across this nation, I believe that people who serve in roles like mine, I think people who serve in the media, I think people who serve in the public sector, people who are religious leaders must be the moral voices on the issues of race, on the issues of ethnicity, on the issues of why binding and building bridges amongst people is the important way to change America for the better. And 50 years after the death of Martin Luther King, we should look to his teachings. We should look to his work. We should look to his, and leaders today have a lot to learn because Dr. King was not always the most popular personality in his times. But his words and his methods, and I think it's important for people to recognize that at the end of his life, just before he died, he was building a new campaign that sought to bring together poor white people, poor black people, poor people of Mexican descent for this very important economic Bill of Rights. He was on the cusp of really trying to build new bridges around economics. We should learn and study real carefully what he did because I think there's important lessons about what we can do today.
You're going to have a variety of different people on your podcast. Give us a sense of who you'll be talking to.
Well, I'd love to talk to Anne Marie Green and Vladimir.
We are here.
We're here.
Return the favor.
Anytime.
Come on our
Anytime.
podcast
We'll
and talk about your lives and your careers and your successes.
Let's do it.
Yeah, totally.
We want to, we want to lift up people that people can relate to because people see all of us, you guys who are in the public eye, and they wonder where'd they start? Mm-hmm. How'd they get there? What has it always been rosy? Mm-hmm. What challenges what challenges have they had to overcome? So if you all say yes,
oh yeah,
we're
I'm
there.
definitely
We're there.
got it. It's recorded.
We're there. Looking over to your producer.
But we'll have we'll have newsmakers and people from all walks of life. I mean, we're developing this, as we go along. The good thing is we've got 30 minutes a week, and we're going to try to lean into the issue of the times and lean into the issue of the moment. So we're
now it's needed more than ever.
Exactly.
There are tweets, there are headlines, there are pundits with extreme views that this is what many people are consuming, and there's so much more to the stories.
We're looking forward
hopefully
to it.
You'll bring it to us.
Yes.
Well, hey, I appreciate the chance to be with you all.
Thank you so much,
and
Marc Morial.
Congratulations to you all.
Congratulations to you. Can't wait for the podcast.
Again, For the Movement launches on Monday, February 12th.